My name's Brian Walsh. In my work as a psychologist, men tell me they have difficulty identifying their emotions, particularly anger, and then expressing it appropriately. I decided to talk with men about their personal experience of anger and to ask the question, what can we do to help men? Here is what they had to say.
You make me so mad. I can't believe you did that. Why did you do that to me? Fuck!
How often do you get angry?
Every second day.
Would it be weekly, fortnightly?
Maybe once a day. I think we're basically a very angry animal. We've been at war with each other since day dot. We murder our own families,
I'd say at least weekly, yeah. Probably quite often in relation to professional issues, political type struggles that we have.
I don't get as angry today as I used to get. Right now, it's very rare for me to get angry. So how many times in a year, it's a bit hard to put a number on, but I would definitely feel the emotion of anger as often as the next person.
I would say rarely.
Right.
Right. And I think there's probably lots of reasons for that. If I was to think of one word, it's probably suppression.
Every day?
Every day?
Every day.
I can become angry and I can flare very quickly, but I get over it very quickly.
It wouldn't be daily. I don't know, weekly over something or other.
On a daily basis. Like, obviously, there's degrees of severity to how pissed off you feel or how angry you feel.
I'd be surprised if it wasn't once or twice a week that I get caught by a spurt of anger.
I've sort of felt it wasn't okay to be angry, and so it's an emotion that I've suppressed, and I'd end up shutting down a lot.
Passively, almost consistently.
Okay.
I'd say, hourly, if on a really bad day. There's just so many things that are, just go wrong. You think that you're going to wake up one morning and think, okay, everything's going to go well, and then it just turns out to be terrible. And I just get angry half the time. So yeah.
If I'm lucky, a few days a month, in which I forget to be angry. Essentially, it's just I just live with it.
Very rarely. Well, I kind of like not being angry. Yeah, really. There's enough angry people around.
Rarely, I would say. However, on the milder side, more often, I could even put it down to once or twice a month.
What happens in your body when you're angry?
It starts with quite a rush of feeling from around my solar plexus, and very quickly travels up through my chest into my head. I can feel my head getting heated, for want of a better word. I become quite agitated, engage the thought that I need to just detach from whatever the trigger is, just to collect my thoughts, so that I don't let the anger or the feeling, the energy, burst out in a way that's going to cause problems that I didn't really intend on causing. In other words, to find a way to regulate with thought and language how I show the anger without hurting the other person.
I can feel blood rushing to my head.
Yeah.
I can feel like just adrenaline and a real sense of urgency and
It's an unpleasant feeling, actually. Dysphoric, I would say. You feel a bit agitated, I suppose. Have a bit of gastric discomfort, even.
Get hot. The hair on the back of my neck, that cliche stuff. It actually happens. I go rigid. The surrounding noises disappear, and I focus on the object of the anger. My whole body gets quite rigid, and there's an over sense of strength. I'm fortunate enough to have a voice that tells me to step back, that not to allow that impulsive feeling, emotions, adrenaline, whatever we want to name it.
Well, slightly accelerated heart rate. There's certainly an emotional impact. Feel, that anger boiling.
The neck, tensing around the shoulders, like an intensity in thinking, and a flight mode. I'm ready to go.
If it's a ticking time bomb, they use that analogy that you're going to explode. It literally does feel a bit like that.
Tightening in the tummy, probably my shoulders start to hunch a bit. Probably my face screws up. They're the things that I couldn't think of.
I don't feel any different physically. I can, if it's a matter of verbal anger, feel that I'm shouting louder than I normally would be shouting.
I just get tense, stressed, through my shoulders, chest, and up my neck, and it's like I'm not ready to fight, but you know what I mean, like just get really sort of furious.
I feel this energy. It's like this big ball of energy that's just waiting to burst out of me, and I could feel it here in my chest, and in my hands, and it's just, I've got to do something with this.
What sorts of things trigger your anger?
I was very angry at the assassination of Angela Taylor and the assassination of young Tynan Eyre in Street, South Yarra in 1987.
I recently finished reading your latest book, The Ethics of Evil, Stories of H Division.
It was when I was in Pentridge. I was lucky enough to be able to do a lot of study, and I was doing a Bachelor of Science. And when I got sent down to H Division, which was the punishment section, they tried to stop me continuing on my studies, and I found a way of being allowed to study and keep studying while I was down there, which was sort of went against the grain at the time. When I had to sit for the exams, what they did was they stripped me, put me into a bare cell, and I had, it was freezing cold, it was the middle of winter, and I had to sit for these exams naked in this bloody cell so that they could ensure that I wasn't cheating. Luckily enough, I'd learned enough about I knew them pretty well and I'd passed, but that made me pretty angry. Yeah.
Someone hurting an animal or someone hurting their child can also get me going, Annoying someone in the street or trying to get violent with them, that promotes the reaction, Sitting in front of the computer, reading Facebook.
Definitely feeling like I'm not being heard. Essentially, if there's what I feel should be a conversation happening, and I don't feel that I'm being heard whatsoever, I tend to get very, very frustrated, which it tends to bubble up a little bit. And then I sort of just have to remove myself. It's the only way I can calm down and get myself centered, figure out what's going on, sort it out.
I've been on the dole for 6 months before that. That's how fucking frustrating that journey is. Just couldn't go back up there. It just become that, I'm giving them my medical certificates, after so many, 2.5 years, 3 years of giving them, all of a sudden they're not acceptable. How is that right? And I've got to go to this new start and do their work for them. I can't work. I've had a major motorbike accident. It's like all of a sudden oh no, we don't believe you. Well, I've been to hospital. I'll show you the X-rays and whatnot, but that's free money, and I can't bear to go in there. It just fucking that really pisses me.
If someone's trying to manipulate me or think they can, get the better of me or trick me or outsmart me or something, if I feel that someone's playing a game like that, that will get my goat up, certainly.
The stuff that's going on about refugees, the way in which those things are going on, in which people are treated, people are being treated inhumanely.
People abusing other people, people devaluing other people, picking on people who are not equal in whatever the situation might be. You know, whether they're physically smaller, whether they're intellectually, you know, not as robust, you know, things like that, emotionally not as robust. You know, so bullying, I think, angers me most of all.
You know, I suppose I feel like I'm a fairly passionate person about what we're trying to do, you know, in terms of change things for people with mental illness, especially young people, but also other similarly sort of, victims of prejudice and discrimination, like the asylum seekers and refugees. That's always made me very fired up, I suppose. But probably more specifically, what makes me angry in the moment is when I see people in the system or processes in the system blocking something that is very positive. For example, the sort of reforms that we've been trying to do in youth mental health.
I actually find rudeness from complete strangers something quite that gets under my skin. Yeah.
If I see young children in a state of threat, threatened by their environment, that arouses pretty immediate anger. If I see people who are vulnerable, I see a lot of people in child protection and they're in very vulnerable situations. Their sort of their ability to parent is being called into question, and you sit and listen to the histories of people who are not doing a very good job themselves at being parents, but listen to how they've been parented, and I'm inspired by the strength of people and what they're able to cope with. But at the same time, feeling a natural sense of anger for them, not at them, but for them, at the losses that have accumulated. And the other things that trigger my anger is sort of seeing young children. You see them troubled in school. It takes a lot of energy, extra fuel to be a naughty kid, to then attract the attention of, you know, paediatricians or experts, psychologists, remedial teachers, all the sanctions for excess behaviour. And you look at the natural kid at their age, you know, their peers, they're bursting with fuel. And it takes a lot of extra fuel to be a naughty child or to be somebody who's disturbed behaviourally. And more often than not, we teach those children by our responses, by our sanctions, that their excess fuel, their excess distress, their excess emotion, their excess anger is the enemy. Yes. It gets them into trouble. And they quickly learn that I don't want to keep showing this, it's going to get me into trouble, and so we socialise kids into sitting on it.
A statement made that's contrary to my moral beliefs, my ethical beliefs, it may be a statement that's insulting a certain race, you know, the prejudice, the stereotypes, the lack of thought of what it takes to be in a particular position.
Are you personally comfortable expressing your anger?
No, not at all. The vast majority of the times that somebody else close to me has expressed anger around me, it has been vastly negative. It's been violent, it's been condescending towards someone else, it's been not at all productive or not at all conducive to finding a solution. And that's sort of driven this fear into me that if I were to let even the smallest part of it out around someone else, then I could potentially escalate a situation into something far worse. And I don't want that to happen. It's completely unacceptable as far as I'm concerned.
But from my experience, anger, for the most part, turns into not just a withdrawal, but more of like a sense of defeat. I feel like when anger hits, I just want to shut down and I don't want to get back up again. For me, I feel like I've suppressed my ability to not even just express anger, but to even like feel it, like it's wrong to feel anger.
I get involved with my clients' emotions in a way that models that here's the feeling in the room, how do we sit with it and let it crystallise into words. And sometimes, you know, when we start out, other people don't have that skill, and part of my role is to be able to model that, not necessarily for their emotions, but how I do that for myself. So sometimes I do feel sad, sometimes I feel angry, sometimes I feel fearful with the different people that I see, and to be able to reflect in an at-rest way that it is okay to put the feelings into words. And just because I put them into words doesn't necessarily mean that then I'm going to act on them. That's a second step. There's probably many more steps between the initial rush of the feeling and how we act. And the more words that we can put in place to mediate those extremes, the more ability we have to regulate what is a very beautiful emotion.
I think I am more comfortable now than I was.
I probably haven't always modulated it the right way. I notice other people are not comfortable with me when I'm in that state. You know, you can see people trying to manage it. You know, so I have to be careful with it in relation to my colleagues. You know, but without it, I don't think I would do anything.
A book, The Angry Ant. Carol Glare, Commissioner of Police, Victoria.
It stemmed from my days as a detective at Sunshine CIB, as it was then.
Right.
And I was obviously fairly fired up about something one day, and the senior sergeant in charge in the uniform section, a man named Pat Hearn, said, "Here comes the angry ant."
Right.
And the ant part comes for the fact that for over 20 years I was the pygmy of the police force.
Right.
Being the shortest, for a long time, I think the lightest member of Vic Pol. I can only say that, as I said earlier, when I'm very angry I become very calm. I think I become very deliberate.
Okay.
And I think carefully about what I say and what I do. Might only be, you know, almost instantaneous in terms of control function, but I understand that I cannot just simply flare and fire without taking aim.
Yes.
I must really, you know, think carefully about what I'm doing and what I'm saying.
I am coming out of hiding. I'm more real, and my observation of others and of myself is that I tend to filter the way in which I present myself to the world, that I'm very conscious of the way in which others see me.
What did you learn about anger growing up in your family of origin?
I can thank my parents, especially my mother. I also observed that striking out in anger was quite futile. It was very damaging. It was disastrous for everybody, not just the observers, but those that were involved especially. And it created great family unrest and disunity in everybody. And they didn't solve the problem.
And my father was a publican, so therefore I was always around people in bars. They were very, very violent places. Yeah, my mother was never a person who was aggressively angry. My father was, he could hold his own with anyone. And he drank a lot, my dad, and unfortunately that often transferred to his behaviour. So he found it pretty easy to get angry. I mean, no, my dad wasn't a physical person with us. The way that I was taught was not only to discriminate, but quite angrily discriminate. You know, you've got to angrily defend your faith. And if you don't angrily defend, look at the martyrs, they gave their lives for it, so you've got to angrily defend your faith. And they angrily taught us to angrily defend our faith. So you learn anger as if it's just a natural way of life.
I think I saw a lot of examples of people making rash decisions and wrong decisions while they're angry, and reacting in ways that were unacceptable while they were angry. I thought that's not the way to go.
No.
That's the time you're most liable to make serious mistakes in behaviour. To avoid those mistakes, because they're not productive in any sense of the word, then I think it's necessary to really think carefully about what you're angry about and what you do about it, and to keep control. Control, I think, is very important.
My anger period would be the punk rock era, because other than that I was just a regular white middle class student. I met all these young people who were feigning anger for the first time, and I thought, this looks, and they had good music to go with it, so I joined in as one of the oldest punks, maybe 10 years older than them, and we became playmates, I guess. And we just listened to the music, and I learned a lot through them, of them learning anger and feigning anger, I guess. I think I was quite protected as a child, and I didn't have a lot to be angry about, really, because I was kind of the figurehead of the family. My mother died when I was very young, and we were reared by our grandmother. I slept in the same bed with my grandmother till I was 12.
Right.
And I did all the grocery shopping and paid the bills and made sure the kids got up and went to school.
So you grew up early, really?
Yeah, or didn't grow up at all, some would say.
Right.
Yeah. But no,
do you remember when your mum died?
Oh yes, I saw it.
How old were you?
6. My mother was murdered. She went out to see a movie with her sister. She'd fled our father, who was an alcoholic. So took all the kids and ran home to mum, and then she went off to a movie that night thinking she was safe with her sister, and we were all bedded down in the house except when he turned up.
Your father?
Yeah, and hid in the bushes out front, and when they came home from the movie, they spotted him, ran for the door, and he shot my mother in the back and killed her. So, so...
That's dreadful.
Well, he was an alcoholic and she'd left him and he'd lost everything. So our family became my grandmother and grandfather were our parents. And he went to prison, and so we grew up with great grandparents, really. My mother fell in the door after the shooting, and my father just walked inside, sat down in the lounge room, and kind of lit up a cigarette and waited for the police to come. So we all just sat around, and I didn't know what it was because I was only a child, but there was no anger. It's just, there's our dad, and we just thought I must have thought she'd just fallen over, I suppose.
My mother's family were always quiet. The idea is you didn't say things were unexpressed. My father had a very strong presence, a very strong male soma, and we knew, I don't know whether others did, but we certainly knew in the family, my three sisters, my mother and I, always knew when he was upset or when he was angry or when he was containing emotions. And although he never struck me, I was always fearful of his anger and the anger of his emotion rather than the anger of his physicality. It was both to me, and he was quite explosively angry at people and at things sometimes, but within the family.
Anger was associated with violence. For me, it was to be avoided at all costs. And I struggled with that for a very, very long time, until I realised that I could, in fact, use it to do good for people and maybe right someone else's wrongs. I guess I was afraid of confronting it because I was afraid of what would happen if I did. So it was quite a few years of turmoil.
In my family, we just learnt that, that anger is a part of life. It's a bad part of life.
I learnt that I needed to shut down to keep safe.
Well, for many of my clients, the most common way of experiencing anger and learning how to regulate it or not is often when we go back to the very first memory of being confronted with anger, usually in somebody close to them, a parent or sibling. And often the theme is that young children who grow up into us as adults who aren't very good at managing and recognising our anger, they might make decisions like, I never want to look like that. So implicitly they end up making an enemy of their own feeling, and in failing to learn the tools to engage with their feelings, it quickly becomes overwhelming and leaves people even more helpless. One of the key tasks of adolescence from puberty onwards is to master self-consciousness, which is to literally put the conscious word, which is mediated by the very fragile, maturing parts of the prefrontal cortex through puberty into early adulthood, to use that part of the brain to essentially turn around and look at our feelings, just sit with them until the energy, if you like, of the feeling crystallises into the spoken word. And within those words we have the tools to harness at times quite powerful bodies of fuel.
Being in touch with your anger or identifying your anger is good. That way you have more of an ability to be able to control it.
My dad probably had a bit of a problem with anger at times. He was like a tense person, you know, and a strong personality, but he was never violent or anything like that, you know. He'd just get very, like he'd be the sort of person that in a shop who would, if he was frustrated, would demand to see the manager, sort of thing. That sort of, that's the way. That's probably the best way of capturing that. But he was a very sociable person as well, and he's a great person. But there was definitely that side to him. In my family of origin, I suppose, I wouldn't say, going beyond the family, the culture, coming from an Irish background and having the Irish exile experience, I found that was a very motivating force for the sort of causes that I've been involved in.
I think I was something like 15 and a half before I knew that my parents actually argued.
Right.
So I didn't know they got angry.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that they had disagreements. But it did teach me not to display my emotions as much.
Yeah.
So not to let you know that, or not to be able to confront, hey, I'm upset about something.
I was always taught, violence is never the answer.
I was blessed to be in a family where both my mother and father perceived violence as inappropriate behaviour. I also observed that striking out in anger was quite futile.
No. To me, anger is kind of another form of creativity.
I was brought up in a way where I was taught to discriminate all the time. I never realised until I got older and
That's
then
what it
looked
was.
at it. But it was like, I was a person who followed football, so therefore you were taught that your football team was the best football team. The other 11 VFL teams in those days were to be hated. Umpires were to be despised.
Yeah.
You had the right to be angry in the crowd. That was part of the deal. You had the right to go there Saturday afternoon and express your anger at the opposition players and at the umpire, and at your own team if they didn't live up to your expectations. So we get not only get taught, but we practice it.
Yes.
I used to practice it my entire life.
It was a very violent family. Everyone all the parents were pissheads, alcoholics, full-blown child beaters, wife beaters, But watching the violence as a child, my mum and dad going off, Dad would come through the door, mum would go off, start belting into him, he'd give her one back. That'd be the end of that. And then I'd have my two sisters behind me crying, and I'd be protecting them mainly.
Yeah.
Same when, like the police or the gangsters come in looking for Dad.
Yeah.
I'd have to be there in front of their mum, And difficulties at school, making friends and all that, Parents were paranoid, wouldn't let you out, you had to come straight home and you weren't allowed out the front gate and all that type of shit.
Right.
So weren't allowed to go to parties, nothing.
Were you close with your dad?
Not really. Yes and no. Yes and no. I was sort of like, he'd take, more as an abuse to mum, he'd take me.
Yes.
I'm taking him.
Taking him out.
Yeah. And I'd end up in nightclubs sitting on Abe Saffron's knees or, Lenny McPherson or something like that, He only ever told me he loved me once in his life.
Really?
And that was on his deathbed 3 days before he died.
Right.
You know I've always loved you, don't you, son?
People often equate anger with violence. Your thoughts?
If you look at, say, the prison experience I had, prison's such a place where the person who gets left alone is the person who demonstrates that not only are they angry and volatile if they're pushed into a situation, but they can follow up violently.
Yes.
No one's going to continue to oppress or humiliate or bully or whatever the person who reveals himself to be that type of person. So it's a technique you learn.
Yes.
And everyone plays that game in prison. They all get angry in the moment. Even the people who aren't that physically powerful still play that game. Leave me alone. So you practice it and you practice it. And
it's a necessity, I gather, is it?
Oh, it's a survival.
Yes.
Absolutely, it's survival. Because if you don't arc up when someone has a go at you, you are dead meat, so to speak. And people know, well, there's an easy victim, so what's going to stop the next person from doing the same thing? So everyone plays this game. So you practice and practice it, and you learn that it's necessary for survival.
I don't believe that violence is the answer.
It's just natural. I think people make too much effort of making anger bad. Giving it a bad name, giving anger a bad name. I mean, violence isn't anger.
In some senses, anger as a weapon, anger as something that bruises other people.
If you don't have any training or tools or knowledge of how to deal with tricky situations, sometimes violence is the only way.
I think lots of people would have a view that says, yes, one goes with the other. It's not necessarily so, but I think it is often so. I don't think it's not natural, but I do think you can get the second one following the first.
Yeah.
Increasingly, we are seeing on the nightly news, in every newspaper, we are reading about angry people, and almost always it's angry young men who are resorting to violence as an outlet for that anger.
Popular culture or whatever puts those two things together. I think there's a big gap between the two. I can't see myself expressing anger or channeling anger into violence. I can't see myself letting it go that far. If you've got a predisposition for violence and you think that violence is an answer, you'll probably utilise the energy from the anger to fuel the violence. I think human beings should really be a bit more sophisticated than that.
There is too much proximity between, I suppose, violence and anger in young men. It's not just an individual thing. Often men get blamed individually for, aggression or violence following anger, but it's a cultural thing, actually.
I think the lines for some men could be blurred, but for me, no, I don't see anger hand in hand with violence. Whether or not you continue the vicious cycle of anger leading to violence, or whether or not you choose to be a man up and walk away.
I think one's okay and one's is not okay. And one's is a thing, something that just comes upon you, and the other one's something that you choose to do. Anger's good. I bet you a lot of people who won gold medals used anger in their training or the day of the race or whatever. Anger's positive. It can drive you to buy a house. It can do anything.
You bloody idiot! Yeah, you're an idiot! You bastard!
Yeah, where do you watch where you're going? Bloody hell! You didn't even see me! You're an idiot! Okay, what am I getting so angry about? Just... It's not worth it, let it go. Take a deep breath. Take another one, just calm down. It's alright. Let it go, let it go. And let's just sit back and enjoy the ride.
What do we need to do to help men deal with their anger appropriately?
Anything that people can do, they can learn to do better.
Yeah.
Like the future to me depends upon the way that you educate the kids coming through.
It's a two-pronged approach to be able to model to young children that we are sensitive to the very things that trigger their own anger. To be more aware of the emotional impact. It's like getting a welding torch to some of the sensitive aspects of the emotional brain in the child when they're exposed to domestic violence. When there's a harsh word that doesn't validate the intention of the child. When the mirror through which they're attaching and learning attachment is chaotic, is disorganised, can't be predicted, becomes an object of threat and love at the same time. It's very confusing and it causes a lot of emotional distress. And the brain just does its job. It just produces more emotion to motivate them to behave in such a way that reduces that distress and brings it back to a position of rest, of homeostasis. But we don't see it, we don't have the words for it. We don't socialise young children into learning to put words around their emotions and to compare their words to the person next to them and to be able to develop fluency and confidence in how they express what they feel without the fear of being sanctioned. I think as a community and as individuals, and then for us as psychologists, we need to be more proactive in finding ways to get in early.
Yes.
To open up emotional intelligence training in late primary school, certainly early high school, when one of the key tasks of adolescence, as I mentioned before, is to learn how to identify that they're our own emotions. How do we develop relationship with them? How do we learn to put them into words? And the emotions include anger. What's its function? It's not the enemy, it's our friend. And how do we learn to harness it as our best friend? As our protector. So yes, early intervention, relationships between older role models and younger men, young adolescents, and the community. I think it's good at the moment, even though the level of domestic violence is triggering an increase in resources for anger management, etc. But I think we're still missing the level of sensitivity and how to address that the childlike brain in the years from 0 to 12 is soaking up all the ways that people who say that they love each other and they care for each other end up treating each other. And they may not be overt but of violence in terms of punching, which unfortunately some children are exposed to, but the level of unregulated words that are spoken in the heat of the moment without thought of the impact. And our brains are so sensitive to the loss that is triggered, because it scars relationships, and the level of broken families. We socialise ourselves and our children into coping with that, coping in inverted commas, but we have little understanding of the impact on the developing brain. There's a huge emotional cost.
We can't solve it by getting rid of the testosterone. It's not an option. So you allow yourself to have a violent outlet, whether that's some kind of sport, whether that's building really big things where you hammer stuff, or to something where you can use force of some kind. I mean, hell, even a fight club, where people are mutually agreeing to participate in a violent sport. Some kind of outlet where you can just let loose and let it go in a controlled situation, it's not going to work for everyone.
I don't know what we can do collectively, but I feel like taking the responsibility in myself, I feel like that's setting an example for who I want to be with around other people in my life. Because I feel like if I'm not the example, then how can I expect the world to to follow it?
But I think you're probably better off knowing at a younger age, getting it taught to you, than not knowing at all, or to think that violence comes with a whack. Or
I feel the stuff that makes the difference is us to work on ourselves, for us to understand what it is that's happening, and the experience of confronting it, seeing it, forces you to see what it is. To see it clearly changes the way that you do it next time.
You have to want to change yourself alone, like it's you who has to change you, but it's very important to have people there who will support your change.
The simple exercise of going through this little conversation and thinking about anger and its triggers and its consequences help everyone to have a little reflection on the topic. There are probably a few things we could stop doing, and that is the subtle reinforcement that anger and violence can actually solve something. If you think about how you couch and report a story and the sort of messages you reinforce, it's probably not that difficult to alter that narrative a little bit. To put a bit of before and after, and did this violence really accomplish anything? Continuously hear these pretty simplistic messages about the world is violent, it's becoming more violent. This is more senseless violence happened here. Just a little bit, one more logical step, or one more sentence, or one more thought process about what does this teach us, or what maybe can we do. If those kind of messages were replayed as often as the more simplistic ones, again, that could make a difference. There's the one thing about when you reflect on being angry and at a point when you're not behaving logically. I mean, that's not an enjoyable place to be. So if people are repeatedly finding themselves in that situation, and there's the possibility of a solution or some help there, or at least a bit of guidance, in the wiser moments, I would say people would think to themselves, why not give it a go?
So I definitely think it is capable of being taught, and we have taught it.
Yes.
Because otherwise we would still all be savages all the time. We would be in a society of I'll just take what I want when I want it. I would say of our society today that those consequences aren't necessarily there. Whilst we're moving away from organised religion. Yes. Our respect for police authority generally has waned, but we don't have anything. The family unit has changed dramatically, and we don't seem to have had anything that takes its place.
Sometimes I think it's just gone too far, Brian. Sometimes I think there's no coming back. Men in Australia have been demeaned, demonstrated against. Just give men back some respect and belief. Well, I think, again, we got a bad rap because most of the males that came back from the Second World War, Vietnam and all that, still highly undereducated, working men, given very little or no tools on how to deal with the shit that happened to them. Let's all try and get a bit more complimentary about it all. Obviously different and made to complement each other in the physical and probably the spiritual, and psychological, most likely.
I don't know, maybe like community sort of meetings or something. Just like, are you okay day? That's the perfect thing that I wish would be an all-round thing, not just one day.
I think socially the framework is already there. You take a look at all of the ads targeting men for feeling depression and like Beyond Blue and all of those places. You take a look at all of the ads targeting men saying domestic violence is wrong, this is wrong, that is wrong. If you were to spend the same kind of resources to target men and talk about, to invite them to talk about anger and maybe, teach them that it is in fact normal and there are ways to cope and all this, you would reach people. You would reach a lot of people.
I think it's just human beings, perhaps in general, that need to sort of, I suppose, understand the dimensions of what you're exploring here better and make the world a safer place. That's obviously one of the most obvious priorities, but also to, as we were talking earlier, to work out how to harness it in a positive way, which probably people do learn to do, but by trial and error. And sport's another thing too. Like having played sport, that was an avenue where you could express anger in a legitimate way. And I think the power of modelling is, you mentioned that word, is probably one great way. I mean, even going back to the football, there's that kind of unselfishness that we saw from the coach to Bob Murphy. I mean, that kind of sense that there's something more important than us as individuals and sharing and generosity, those sort of virtues, but you've got to model them. You can't just preach them. Being angry and passionate about injustice is part of showing compassion and love to people, I think, too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think people are hungry for that sort of inspiration. I mean, you look at the sort of failure of inspiration in most areas, in society at the moment, from many but not all leaders, I suppose. And again, it's not the individual, it's a failure of the kind of culture as well. What we've learned from setting up services for youth mental health, like Headspace, is we need the help of the people that we're trying to work with, to develop the solutions. So there's no point in us working it out in our own little ivory tower, what we think is needed, and then trying to roll it out. We've actually got to involve them in I suppose, the design and learning process about how to tackle the issue.
Yeah.
We've got to actually, pick the brains of the people in that 15+ group who we're trying to sort of help deal with this issue. Because I suppose the control of anger, or the channeling of anger, is mediated in the brain through the frontal lobes being able to manage the emotional parts of the brain. And that is vulnerable in this sort of age group, before, up to 25, let's say. Those connections are a bit weaker, and they dissolve in alcohol and drugs.
Brian, I really see the first step in the solution is to start educating children from a very young age, and giving them alternative ways of dealing with problems rather than anger, and particularly regarding anger turning to violence.
Yes.
As you say, they're different phenomena, so really need to start at that level. And by the time these people leave school, having had that sort of input and training and help along the way, I would suspect that a very great number would then be much better placed to manage their anger. So education, I believe, is the absolute foundation of dealing with anger. And one of the planks of that education program is to teach people to consider the consequences of their actions before they do something, rather than having to deal with adverse consequences afterwards. A lot of the people who commit violence in a domestic setting have witnessed violence, usually by their parents. Because those people haven't had any instruction or training in their younger days, then they can't break the cycle in many instances. So they, again, police in schools would address the issues of family violence and domestic violence, and teach them from a very early age that there are other solutions.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
And we have never matured into really understanding courtesy and respect, and because I see it as a very big social issue. Now, I've seen people get angry when they see people talking on the phone and driving. In other words, people learn how to get angry because we're educated to respond emotionally to the things we think are wrong.
Typically, it takes a lot of energy and fuel to be antisocial, and more often than not, you find there's very good reason for the triggering of that fuel that has been building up over many years, and nobody's ever seen it. Nobody's ever talked about it. More often than not, it's domestic violence, it's physical, sexual abuse, because many of those young men, they end up in youth justice settings. Their history is that they really can't be in the same space as another human being for very long before it becomes very disorganised and chaotic and aggressive and violent. And the experience for them to be able to find a way to sit at rest in the same space, in proximity to another human being, in an organised way, that affords the chance to start to reflect the function, the natural healthy function of the anger, which they've otherwise learnt has been their enemy and been everybody else's enemy. To be able to validate that is a very powerful opportunity in the relationship between two people, and then to be able to model how to harness that anger. Emotion is our best friend. It's the fuel that the body produces to fight to the death for us to protect life. It's positive, it's always positive. It gets a bad rap because we don't have the tools to understand it and harness it.
I think when you can't tell your story, that's the beginning of anger.
I think that, like when you're feeling angry, you should express it.
Yeah.
You should try and get it out of your system as soon as possible.
I felt the process of reading through the questions and giving them some thought. I found it quite instructive.
Even this current debate or welcome sort of addressing of domestic violence, which is a tremendously devastating experience for people to go through, and especially children and women. But it's like a capital offence. So how do you redeem yourself after if you're a man in that situation? There's got to be a way out of that. I mean, it's not. We don't have capital punishment, so there's got to be a life beyond that. If the person's looking for redemption and trying to atone, so that's the other side of the coin to all the really positive steps that the community has taken to tackle domestic violence and prevent it and show that it's not an acceptable situation under any circumstances.
I mean, just having this dialogue has made me think about it. So just getting it onto a page, or getting it into a discussion, I think is at least a step.
Yes.
That says at least we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be as negative as everyone makes it out to be. Nowhere near it. It can be a mostly positive thing if approached correctly.
Anger's just like a part of life, and if you learn how to channel that anger into something positive, then you're good.
This is a good thing to air. This is good for me. This is difficult and worthy. And useful. Difficult, worthy, and useful.
I think there's hope, always is. We work on having conversations with people to get them to take a responsibility for who and what they are, especially their behaviours, but how you respond is the one that makes you that little bit better.
I'm not angry. I get angry, but I'm not angry.
It seems compassion ain't on the agenda. These charlatans in parliament, they often seem senseless. These dudes in suits still snooze like they're fresh out the womb, while yous are abused right under our roofs. And they say we gotta worry about a terrorist threat, but really at home is where the terror is spread. Cause Jimmy got home and sunk a bottle, got tipsy, got slow, stumbled, drunk and hobbled. His toddler's in the lounge making too much noise. He tells her once, hear the quake in his voice. Why can't you shut up, and starts breaking her toys. And before she know it, escape ain't a choice. In his head, he calls this discipline. But with that being said, what's instilled in him? He learned from his father, who spoke with his hands. This couldn't be farther from what we know makes a man, but it formed him, and his actions distorted into fragments. At his core, he doesn't have sense. Rational thought is just so absent. It's a that's what
what they say, like staring at the window when you barely slept. Right here in homes where the terrorists spread. Our vision is blurred, can never see what's next. Our vision is blurred, can never see what's next. A terrorist spread, that's what they say, like staring at the window when you barely slept. Right here in homes where the terrorists spread. Our vision is blurred, can never see what's next.